The second of two American brothers convicted of murdering their parents more than 30 years ago has been denied his request for release from prison. The parole board spent over 12 hours considering whether to approve Lyle Menendez, who's now 57, for parole before denying his request. It comes a day after his younger brother Erik was also denied parole, meaning both will now stay in prison for at least another 3 years before they can apply again. The brothers have served 35 years of a life sentence for the 1989 shotgun murders of their parents in their Beverly Hills home in California, in a notorious case that still divides Americans. Increased attention has been paid to it following a recent Netflix series. Well, our Los Angeles correspondent Peter Bowes told us more about the parole board hearing.
It was a very long hearing. It went on all day, and just like the day before when Erik Menendez appeared before the board, Lyle Menendez was questioned about his time in prison. That is the key issue at these parole board hearings. They want to see how the inmate has behaved, whether they've followed prison rules, that kind of thing. And they said that to a large extent he had been a model prisoner. Lyle Menendez got an opportunity himself to address the board, and he expressed remorse. He expressed extreme sadness about what had happened. He says his mum and dad didn't have to die on that day. And the board said that despite his remorse, which they considered to be genuine, that he still potentially posed a risk to the general public, and that's why he wasn't being released. And largely the same reason was given for his younger brother Erik, which means that the pair of them will continue to stay behind bars, and in both cases they have been given the opportunity to apply again for parole within the next 3 years.
Has there been any reaction so far to this denial of parole?
We have heard some reaction from family members already. And just as they said 24 hours ago when Erik Menendez was denied parole as well, they acknowledged that in most cases in California, in fact, it's more than 80% are denied on their first attempt at getting parole. So in some senses, the family members say that this is no huge surprise, but clearly they are disappointed at what's happened. We heard from several family members, at least the board heard from several family members during this very long hearing, character references in a sense, saying that they believe that Lyle and the day before Erik were reformed characters and that they had changed. And particularly in the case of Lyle, we heard that his time in prison, he has been attempting to help other prisoners with rehabilitation, something that Erik has also worked on as well. So taking all those issues together, the family still believe, they strongly believe that their day will come and that they will eventually get freedom again.
Peter Bowes. Well, Alison Treacle is a criminal defence attorney in Los Angeles. She also went to school with Erik Menendez. I asked her whether the decision to deny Lyle's parole was expected.
I am not shocked that he was denied parole. Clearly, the board focused a lot of its attention. This is one of the longest parole hearings in California history. California's parole system is usually set up for about a 2 to 3 hour hearing. Then the committee members, which are about 2 members of a 21 committee that is appointed by the governor, they review the case and they make a decision immediately thereafter. So the total hearings, for the most part, are about 3 hours. Here, you have about 10 hours for Erik, 12 hours for Lyle, and the bulk of that time was focused not on their rehabilitative efforts, not on all the good things that they have done in prison, not on the family support, but on the murders themselves, on the burglaries that came before the murders, and on the violations. And for Erik, even though Lyle technically had more violations than Erik, the violations that Erik had were more serious. So they were talking about drug use. Cell phones for both of them was a major issue. Erik was inappropriate contact with visitors. For Lyle, it was the fact that he also had violations as recent as 2024 and 2025, knowing that this matter was going to come before the parole board or the court. And so they said, look, here's the situation. We do believe that he has accepted responsibility. We do believe that it's genuine. They applauded his efforts at work and education. He's obtaining his master's degree, but they were concerned with the reports that he was still antisocial, he was deceptive, he was manipulative. They talked about the fact that he had encouraged people to lie at the trial. So all of those factors, he was a moderate risk. And like your reporter said, it's actually a smaller number for lifers. So for lifers, the chances of parole at your first hearing is about 6% in the state of California, which is really, really low. So the family was disappointed, but I'm sure they were not shocked.
Now, you went to high school with Erik.
Yeah.
What was he like?
Very smart, arrogant, entitled. I studied with him. I knew him quite well. I played on the tennis team with him. But you never imagine that the person that you find to be arrogant would ever do something like this, would he ever murder their parents. I remember specifically spending time immediately after the murders with Erik and several of our friends, and we were consoling him. And I found it striking that he really wasn't sad, that he talked about the money that he now had and the watch that he had bought, the car, that he was going to focus all his energies at playing tennis in Israel. And I came home and was having a conversation with my father, who was a psychiatrist. And I said, you know, it's so strange. He really wasn't sad. There we were to console him. And he didn't really seem that sad about it. And my father, the psychiatrist, said, well, you know, people express grief differently and they mourn in different ways. And I said, yes, but this was different. So it's an interesting full circle moment, because here we are 35 years later. I knew him well before the murders. I knew him before the burglaries, which the parole board considered, and they considered the seriousness of those against both Lyle and Erik, and found them that they still posed a danger to the community. And so they felt that the fact that they were committing violations, prison rule violations, while this matter was pending, that they really weren't ready to be released, that they were a moderate level, they should be a low level, and that is why they were denied for 3 years. They could have been denied up to 15 years. So the silver lining for them is that they can renew this request in 3 years. And they also have an attendant habeas corpus petition pending in the Superior Court in California, which may result in them receiving a new trial. That is possible.
I wonder, this case has made global headlines, partly recently because of the Netflix series. What does that make you feel like when you knew Erik in his younger years?
Well, again, I also knew his father, and I cannot speak to whether Erik and Lyle were sexually abused. I wasn't in their home, but their father was a tyrant. I played tennis with Erik, and the father was really nasty and controlling and demeaning, and was cruel. Was a cruel human being. The mother was very quiet and meek. I have questioned through the years, you know, why in the world would an 18 and 21-year-old not just leave? Why wouldn't they just leave the home? Were they in such fear? Were they molested? These are questions that I've always have been unanswered for me. They still remain unanswered for me. So on a personal side, I think to myself, here I am 35 years later, I'm an attorney. I'm actually talking about a case where somebody I know has been in prison while I have gone on to have a career and raise a family, and he spent every day of those years incarcerated. and is 35 years enough time to spend in prison? And then on the other hand, I think about the brutality of the crime and the fact that there really wasn't a justification, even if he was molested, to kill his mother. And both of them did express remorse. I think that Lyle showed much more remorse. I think that Lyle certainly convinced the board um, that he owned it, that he accepted responsibility for what he did. He didn't make any excuses. But the board felt that overall, given the brutality of the crime, given the prior burglaries and the violations while incarcerated, they just were not suitable for release.